Here to cover all things crime, history, and politics, we are at the desk. I'm your host, Lauren Perry, and in today's episode, we will be talking about NATO and presidential communications. Now, come take a seat with us at the desk. Welcome back to ATD. First, it's time to send it over to the politics panel to discuss NATO. Over to you, Nikolai.
Thanks, Lauren. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was formed back in 1949 in the aftermath of World War II. The organization was created to protect each country and promised that an armed attack against one member would be considered an attack against all. The alliance is comprised of 32 countries, including the United States. Recently, members of NATO have refused to join President Trump's Iranian port blockade. Today, the politics panel will be discussing the role of NATO and we'll be debating whether or not NATO is still a necessary alliance. All right, guys. I'm going to start with an opening question and then pose it to you guys. So it was formed back in 1949 to counter Soviet threat, and no longer exists that threat. So why should a Cold War institution still be relevant in 2025?
Well, I think NATO is essential not only for the protection of Americans, but for the protection of people all across Europe and other NATO countries. I mean, it should be considered a bargain for us. It amplifies American power through forward defense that keeps a straight, hard line on places like Russia or elsewhere, that keeps threats far from our own borders. Our allied troops and across the countries in NATO share intel, they share their bases, they share their troops, they share their costs. They protect each other in times of need, like after 9/11, when most of the countries of NATO came together when we invoked Article 5 to protect us against or to help us in the aftermath of Iran or after the 9/11 attacks. And a stable Europe is only good for the United States, means more stable markets. And I'll remind you, our past two world wars, which resulted in tens of millions of deaths, came as a result of European instability.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you that, NATO was a very useful organization with the United States. I mean, what it did during the Cold War, it stopped this threat of the Soviets. But after the fact, there hasn't been a clear message of what NATO is trying to do or what it was created to do. For example, when NATO was created, it was the sole purpose of it was to stop the spread of the Soviets across Europe and further into other regions. Well, now, it's been, it's to combat some issues. There's not really clear-cut reasons of why NATO is now still around, especially when they're not adhering to a lot of the things that NATO is supposed to be about. And we talk about defense. They're not really doing their part in paying the defense expenditures. So in that instance, we're paying the prices for this, and they don't come to our aid. We clearly have seen that. So why should we be paying all this money?
NATO has always come to our aid until we betrayed them with the Iran war. We didn't even tell Congress that we were going to war, and we did not tell NATO. So we blindsided them there. We put them into this mess. We've hurt the economy with this war, with the surging of oil. We've put them in a terrible position, and we've made ourselves look disgraceful and untrustworthy. So we have really damaged our allyship there. But until then, NATO was helping us. They saved us after 9/11. They sent their troops. They put boots on the ground and blood. They had soldiers lose their lives to help us in Afghanistan. And recently, President Trump remarked that NATO had never been there for us. NATO had never done anything for us, even though they sent their own soldiers to die for us, among other things, like Ryan said, equipment and intel. So if anything, we are in the wrong. And that is why NATO said they didn't want to support us in this war. So that's why we've put ourselves in this situation. But until then, they had always been by our side. They had our backs.
Well, the question is that is NATO still relevant today? And I think if we look at the historical track record, they have proven that they are not relevant today and they're not beneficial to the United States. Why is Europe so afraid of the United States pulling out of NATO? It's because it is a benefit to them. If it was something that was, giving us more of a benefit than we were giving to the Europeans, they wouldn't care if we left. And so I think if we look at the historical record, you look after 9/11, you look at the Iraq War, did NATO really contribute to a victory there? No. You look at Iraq, you look at Syria, you look at Afghanistan, you look at Libya. Each and every time, we've not had our objectives carried out despite the help of NATO. And so I don't think we've seen from the historical record, a major amplification of American power through NATO. And then if you also look at Europe, the point of this was to protect against the Soviet threat, which is no longer there. And, we've kind of transformed this alliance that was defensive, that was supposed to protect Europe, into something that has been going around the world on offensive missions. And that has created distrust and disunity between the Europeans and the United States. Why is Tony Blair so hated in the United Kingdom when he was one of their most popular prime ministers? Because he signed up for an American war in Iraq and it destroyed our reputation in Europe because we took them along on these escapades across the world. And so that has proven that NATO is only destroying our relationships with the Europeans because we're taking them into these other conflicts.
And let's be clear about why NATO was even originally formed. There was 5 countries when they were forming it, and the only reason that they actually came to America for help is because their defenses weren't strong enough in order to create a coalition to stop the Soviet Union. Now you look at it, there's 5 countries that pay the 2% of GDP that you need for defense spending. 2 of those countries, Sweden and Finland, joined in 2023 and 2024. So there's 3 countries now. Now, only 23 out of the 32 have even gotten remotely close to paying the 2% on defense. Talk about freeloading. When we started NATO, it was a $3 billion infrastructure investment on things like bases, airfields, pipelines, communication networks. The United States funded 1/3 of that. So if we do the math here, the United States is 1/3 paying for 32 other countries. That's ridiculous when we're spending our money and we don't need their defense because we're doing it on our own. And to your point, they're scared of us pulling out. We're not scared of them
I
pulling out.
don't think they're scared of us pulling out. We came to them for help for the Iran war. We asked them for help. And then after they told us, no, they don't want to help us, then President Trump said, oh, well, we didn't need them anyway. But we looked for their help.
Well, I mean, of course, you look to
assistance.
people that you think would help you out. Like, let us land our planes in your bases. Let's try to take out this imminent threat. And I know we're not going to debate about Iran right now, but then you look at what happened in the Strait of Hormuz. I know oil prices in America are rising right now, but we are oil independent. And when the strait eventually opens back up, the prices of oil will go right back down. Europe is the one who's, in limbo right now, trying to figure out where to get oil because they're not oil independent.
NATO is in essence, it's a defensive contract. That's why Article 5 exists. So if one country gets attacked, everyone else comes to that nation's defense. When we attacked Iran, we were not currently attacked. Other countries within NATO have no incentive to help us in a war in which a NATO country wasn't provoked or wasn't attacked. Now, when it comes to spending, the 2% of GDP that each country the goal of each country in NATO is to spend on the common funds that go there. 23 countries out of the 32 have hit that, with some countries like Poland, Norway, and I believe Latvia hitting a higher amount of the GDP that goes to NATO than our own does. And they have pledged in the past year for all the countries for the total goal to be 5% of the GDP by 2035. So, and if we're really thinking about it, the direct cost of NATO on the U.S. military is less than 0.1% of the total military expenditures that we spend per year, and that's going back to 2024. Only $753 million out of the near $1 trillion that we spend in our total military that goes to the Middle East, that goes to our to our goals in the Indo-Pacific region around there. We only contribute to 16% of their annual budget, which of course is a large amount compared to most other countries. But since we're the richest country, we're the most economically successful country on earth. That just makes sense. The amount of protection that we get by being in NATO compared to the cost is way over exaggerated, in my opinion.
Well,
Less than 0.1% of our total military defense budget goes towards NATO.
To your point of that, the Europeans, some of these countries are starting to hit the 2%, which is great, although they haven't done it for
23
years.
out of 32.
Or 23 out of 32, which is fine. But the 23 was 14 a year prior. The only reason that people started to put more money into it is because Russia started to take Ukraine in slowly and then eventually attack them. And that's why they started spending it. And that's why Finland and Sweden came to NATO's help. But the European NATO members have collectively underfunded their own defenses by $827 billion since 2014, nearly equal to the entire annual U.S. defense budget. If you're going to say that you're serious about defending and being, protecting this world order, then you have to hold your own. I don't care if we're the richest country in the world. You have to hold your own because
But if they're so weak, why did we need them for Iran? We called out
we didn't
for their
ask
help.
them to do anything as in like, hey, go bomb.
Trump did.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't happen necessarily when you look at Iran was done by the United States and Israel, and then we asked our allies, hey, this is what we're doing. We'd like to...
Yeah, we asked them for help.
What was the point of us asking them was because they relied on the oil, and we were not trying to foot the cost for holding open this oil for them when they're the ones relying on it.
Because we
But
can't
we're
defend ourselves
diverging
without them.
away from the question at hand, which is NATO still useful? And if NATO is able
if it wasn't
to
useful, we
fund
wouldn't
their
ask
own
them.
defense, and actually their combined GDP and military is much larger than Russia. And if we look at what's happened in Ukraine, are we seriously going to say that Russia is able to attack and take over all of Europe? Absolutely not. Yet the United States has been continued to be drawn into Europe, investing more into their defense, investing more into Ukraine, when we should be pivoting to Asia to the greater threat, a country like China that actually has a military that is capable of fighting great power conflicts, unlike Russia.
But if NATO was so unnecessary, and if we're making the most of the contributions and we're still not succeeding against Russia, and combined with all the contributions we made along with the other contributions from Europe, what does that say about our contributions in general? And you say there's no threat anymore from the USSR, but you got guys like Putin that want to restore the USSR to its former glory, and that's why
Well,
they're
That
invading
is,
Ukraine.
that is a completely
And that's why-
out
but
of
that's what he
context
wants,
quote.
and that's
That's
why-
not what he wants.
That's what he's echoed, that's what he's mentioned, and that's what Donald Trump has also echoed with him.
He
So
said
it starts
if you
with
were a
Ukraine.
fool, if you
It
think
starts
that
with
the Soviet
Ukraine,
Union
and
should
then
come
it
back.
turns into Poland, which is why they're already sending drones into Polish airspaces
Well, you
to
look at-
survey it.
you
It
look at-
starts with one, and then it turns into those northern countries, Latvia, Norway.
If you
It's-
look
it
at what
starts
Russia's
with
been
one
able to
place in
do with
terms of
Ukraine,
others.
they have done, it's been an absolute military failure. They were originally taking a lot of Ukraine, but in the past couple months, Ukraine has taken back a lot of the territory that Russia has claimed to take. And to your point, our NATO allies have started going to China. And, the Spain president the other day was saying how we should look to China to help us out. That's, go ahead and work with
Yeah,
the
that's
dictator.
because
And
And
we
the
are
intelligence we
away.
get from all of Europe is beneficial not only for Russia, for also places like China.
Russia is not the threat that they pose
No, it's
come
not,
Cold
but-
War. And the fact that that's kind of what this whole NATO was created on, it just doesn't make sense
Well,
why
Russia
we need
was
it anymore.
also actively conspiring with Iran
Well, and you
and
could
trying
say-
to hurt us. So why would we side with them over our NATO allies who have always been there for
You
us?
could
It
argue
just
that
makes no
NATO
sense.
is the problem of why Russia is the way it is today, because NATO as a whole, it's true. They alienated NATO. They allowed all the countries that the USSR used to hold up in the north of Europe. And as we let in these countries that Russia once used to have, suddenly the only country no one was allowing in was Russia. And what happened when all these countries that were closer got close?
Ukraine's not in NATO.
Well, now
But we
because
made
of the nuclear
offer
threat.
yes, because Ukraine was a red line for Russia, we offered to bring them in. We offered to bring Georgia in. Specifically because we continued with the project of NATO and invited all of these countries in the Baltics, and then in Bucharest, when we invited Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, that directly caused Russia to invade Georgia and then invade Ukraine. That's the problem. And because we've continued to push NATO and to expand NATO and to turn it into something that is not just a pure defensive alliance, into something that's building this project to spread American power, we have pushed Russia towards China and put us in a worse position, both with the Europeans and with, our conflict with China.
If 0.1%, less than that, of our total military budget is successfully helping to drive off the Russian threat that exists, and even if militarily they're not a threat. They're still a threat in regards to cybersecurity or things of that aspect, because they have had influence over previous elections. We have to consider that a success of NATO. If we're only giving 0.1% of our budget, we're adding to 16% of their total budget. And if countries like Norway are giving more per capita than us, we have to consider that a success and a bargain for the United States.
I don't think it's a success
Russia's
to
always-
say
It's a bargain
that they're
if
solving a
Ukraine's
problem
been
that
able
they
to push off for
created.
that
Right.
long
Guys,
against
we're
its
reaching the
opposing
end of the
superpower.
debate, so I'm going to have to ask for the closing statements from each side.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tristan makes the great point about if we're the ones, as NATO collectively is the one that created this Russia problem, and then we're saying that
Well,
we're
that's a Russian Russian talking point that NATO created.
That's
Russia.
No, it's not.
Yes,
That's
that
pure
is.
fact.
Russia has always been
It's
our
pure-
enemy.
what
it is
NATO has
pure-
always been
it
our
is-
ally. Why would we
Russia
turn
has
on
not
our
always
allies?
been. Russia. Time out. Russia was not always our enemy. They were actually our ally in World War II and then in the Cold War. But to the point, we
Russia's always
alienated
been our
Russia.
enemy since then.
We
It
alienated
makes no sense
Russia.
for us to turn
We-
towards Russia. What more would Russia want than us?
We
to
alienated
leave NATO?
Russia as a whole, collectively in NATO. And then from that, it's created this Russian problem. So we wouldn't have to do this spending and protecting Europe necessarily if we didn't create this problem in the first place. From, like you're saying, it was a defensive coalition. And then since the airstrikes in Bosnia, when we got involved for the first offensive strikes that NATO partook in, we all of a sudden became this offensive threat where NATO's now not just protecting Europe, but protecting the entire world, which doesn't seem to work.
But
Your
okay, but
closing statement.
those offensive threats in Europe were a part, or in Europe, even though those countries weren't exactly in NATO, it's a part of Europe. But bubbling out to my main point is that the cost of NATO, the cost on the United States, and what we get out of it should be considered a bargain. We give, like I said multiple times, less than 0.1% of our total military spending goes towards NATO, and we get the intelligence, we get the bases across the entire continent, and we get to help our allies fighting off.
NATO has helped
yes.
us with intelligence, with equipment. They've sent their soldiers to die for us, and now we have turned against them. And never ever has a president attacked NATO like this. But I don't have to say anything about what we have in the White House. We can just look at the picture that our president posted of him as Jesus Christ, and that truly says it all. And that is not the man who we want to follow, and that's not who we want to take advice on NATO from.
Well, that's an opinion piece, but
That's
anyway.
all we got, guys. Thank you for the debate here today. That is unfortunately all the time we have at the desk tonight. NATO has been around for 77 years. With how much our world has changed since then, it's important to look at NATO's role in modern day society and see if its role is still a necessary one. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Nikolai. We'll be back at the desk right after this short break. We are once again back at the desk. It's time to send it over to the history panel to discuss the history of presidential communication. Over to you, Max.
Thanks, Lauren. In the United States, one, if not the most prominent figure of the nation, is the president. They are the figureheads of our nation, and everyone wants to know about their plans. That's what makes communication such a key element of a presidency. Throughout history, presidents have had to effectively communicate messages to the American people in a variety of mediums. Today, the History Panel will be exploring the history of presidential communication, from the era of print all the way to the era of social media. All right, so what I'd like to do to get started is just walk through our history a little bit. So I want to start with print because we definitely had that before everything else. So go ahead, Lily, tell us a bit about it.
Hello. Print era journalism started in the early 1700s. It was a very effective way to get off of political opinions and political ideology from candidates and people holding official positions. It's definitely changed a lot. What I like most about print era journalism is the way that it was set up to allow the reader to interpret and build their own opinions based off their readings. But there is a error with that, as most early American print journalism newspapers are biased or partisan. So presidents had less control over their media, as the media could interpret their speeches in a way that they liked rather than what the president at the time was saying. And it was really the only way that we could get this communication across at the time. Mm-hmm. That's how people heard. They rarely gave speeches and stuff like that because we were unable to broadcast and there was no technology. So everyone got their information from the newspapers.
That's really interesting. And so you've got that, and then you go up through radio, I believe it is, right? So tell us a bit about broadcast.
Yes, radio came through in the first ever president, Warren G. Harding, to broadcast. He gave an address in 1922 on the radio, but that is not when radios really came to a mainstream. That happened more in the 30s, and around 1933, 90% of households had a radio on them. And that's when the era of the fireside chat happened. You know, it's synonymous with FDR and his presidency. He would get on the radio and basically show the American people life's not so bad. Because during that time, one of the worst eras in American history, I would argue, Great Depression, World War II, not a great time to be an American citizen. But FDR, he got on the radio and basically delivered some hope, showing what the plans are, and just trying to relate to the American people in a way that he can. So that was a real key point within the 1930s. And then switching over, FDR also the first ever president to appear on television in 1939, but then it really didn't become a big thing until the late 40s. Harry Truman, first ever president to appear give a presidential address on television. It's 1960, the first ever presidential address became on television. And with television, I think it's mostly just a way presidents become more personable. You know who they are. I mean, I don't know back in the day if you really were able to really see who the president was. I get their paintings and all that, pictures, but you get to see them in the flesh on television. I really think it adds to this personability of a presidency.
So that's really interesting. And then we also see it segue up even further through the modern era. 1994, White House gets a web browser versions. Now you can suddenly look at them on the web. And then Bill Clinton is the first president to have an email, and he emails two people, the Swedish prime minister and also the fellow in space when he was in space. And then we have social media, which I think brings us to probably some of our discussion today, although I want to get into the history a little bit more. But with social media, we have Barack Obama being one of the first people in 2008. He's got his Twitter account that he's using whenever he signs off personally. He just does -BO, like lowercase, just to indicate that it's really coming from him. And then you have the transition over of the POTUS account, which Barack Obama started. Then Trump had it in the first presidency, then Biden, and now Trump again. And Trump then created Truth Social in 2022 as his own form of social media to sort of communicate to the people. So you'd said something interesting about becoming personable, specifically in how presidents started doing that in the 40s, but then how they also were whenever they were doing fireside chats. So I'm curious, question for both of you. Do you feel like there were benefits of your communication methods that allowed the president to interact more on a one-on-one basis with people? Not exactly one-on-one, but like the parasociality, the idea that the president could be there, could just be talking to you like a normal person.
I'm sure on the era of like television, when it was so new to people, television screen, and you're looking at someone on that television screen, I'm sure there is this parasocial relationship back in the day. I don't know if it's still a thing now, but you're like, there they are right there. They see me. I don't know if there was back in the 40s, but I think there definitely is one. And in the radio as well, hearing a president's voice from the comfort of your own home, that certainly, I'm sure, that did something to the people back in the 1930s. And there was this sort of personability to it.
Yeah. How about for
I do think that there is some sort of parasocial relationship, but on the contrary, I still do feel that media outlets give a separation, because at the end of the day, it is just their writings and it is just what they're saying. We're not physically with them, and yes, we could see them, and it gives us a greater understanding and kind of a closer relationship, but I don't think it gives off what they're trying to achieve there by I'm at a loss for words, so I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So it seems like there has been an increasing progression towards parasociality with these methods of communication that presidents have with the American public. Because presidents are now progressively being able to, speak their mind a little bit more to what they specifically want to say. Obviously, in your case, that wasn't true at all, right? You said the media, they interpret, they present. Once you're doing fireside chats, I believe you phrased it like a podcast.
Yes.
That
FDR's
is
podcast.
FDR's podcast. Bring it back. We start to see that. And then definitely in the era of social media, when you can just, send out a tweet, you now suddenly have something that you can say whatever you want. And speaking of that, I believe there was an image recently that came about. Did you read into that at all, either of you? Would someone like to talk about what the image was that was apparent?
Yes. So on Trump's Truth Social account, he released an image depicting him as what he claims himself as a doctor, with multiple other figures around him healing someone. And this caused a major issue, as a lot of devoted Catholics and Christians believed, and a lot of people in general believe, that he was depicting himself as Jesus Christ himself. And that just kind of stirred the pot very largely across the political spectrum, especially because a lot of Trump supporters are Christian, Catholic, of that sort of nature. So it has caused a very large uprising amongst the American people. And if you look into it, you'll see hundreds of clips of people expressing their disgust, and there is clips of people acting confused. And this doesn't speak for the whole population. I don't know how everyone feels about this. I only know how people I have seen on social media platforms and I've talked to feel about this. So that's kind of the grasp of what was posted this weekend.
That was very interesting. And did you have some thoughts on that?
I did see it. It's an interesting thing because he posted on his Truth Social, which is I would assume is a pretty small audience. But because, there's probably journalists out there always looking on his Truth Social page. I'm sure that's why it exploded. Yeah, he has been posting some concerning messages. There was that. There was the messages to Iran earlier.
Oh, yes.
It's really shown a change in how presidents used to communicate. I remember back in print, how perfect it has to be, their messaging. I think it's about Washington, how perfect his first address had to be to really show the American people that he's the president. And then you have Trump, posting AI generated imagery. It just really shows the difference in how presidents communicate now.
Yeah. Do you think that ease with which a president can send out a message is more beneficial or detrimental? Because no one can argue that it's easier to just send something out on Truth Social, but is it better that that's the case, or is that worse?
In my opinion, I personally believe that it has its ups and its downs. With social media, you'll always have the problems of mis and disinformation being rapidly spread. It's hard to properly grasp what you are reading unless you fact check. When you're looking at things like political tweets or Truth Social posts, I think that specifically amongst the Trump administration, it's just a rough spot. It's hard to explain. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I can't. I want to stay as nonpartisan as I can. And if once we get into this subject, I fear that I won't be able to stay true to what I'm trying to express.
That's perfectly fine. Yeah. I think it is interesting then to see how this information is being communicated, and especially the way it worked back with print. I know that this is, I fear before American politics, but in ancient Rome, when people would give speeches, someone would just like kind of make up the general vibe of the speech, and it would become a thing for writers to like show off their own writing skills by how well they could interpret somebody else's speech. So I just think it's interesting that we've come from a place where everybody is trying to represent ideas in a very intense way, and it's just now gone from people doing a secondhand interpretation that you just kind of have to trust, versus shifting over to a person being able to unadulteratedly say something, and then not exactly walk it back, because the quote is, "Oh, I think it was me as a doctor." It's like, is it walking it back or is it a legitimate claim? And again, it's still a degree of interpretation that we have to do.
Yeah, it's definitely a very hard challenge. Like I said, when you're dealing with things like social media posts, you only have so many characteristics and so many, there's this phenomenon called the attention economy, which is social media platforms compete for our attention. And with that, our attention only lasts, say, maybe 30 seconds. So we have to get as much information out as strongly as we can in that 30 seconds that we grasp the reader's attention. And that is a major issue, especially when delivering political information over social media. And I think that is why so many politicians and people use such strong language, because it grabs the reader's attention. Yet I also feel like this could have its downsides, like I was talking about before, the spread of mis and disinformation. That's why at the end of the day, when you're working with social media and reading political information from those websites, it's always important to go back and read factual information from a news source, because yes, you are hearing it directly from the person itself, but that might not be the whole big picture of what they're depicting.
Yeah, I think that's true. I look at an app like TikTok. TikTok really posts the most, like if it's Trump's presidential address, they're just really going to post the key elements to it or whatever things he says. It's really just the key points, and you're not seeing the whole picture. So social media, it's kind of you're getting the necessary information in the quickest time possible, but you're also losing out on key facts because they're really just doing the stuff that's going to get the most views, most engagement. So it's a slippery slope in that manner.
Especially with political parties and such strong political divides. You could have, say, you are a Democrat, you could have adjusted your feed to be completely Democratic in that sense. So you're only receiving the information that the one side of the party is facilitating towards you, which is also a major issue through social media.
I mean, algorithms definitely are helpful in dividing, but I wonder about this because in the age of print, especially early on, it was so divided as well. The print pieces were. And so do you think, because you've studied it more than I have probably, people were self-selecting down lines? Like, is it so different from what is done today?
Slightly, yes. I feel that a lot of people in the print era of journalism used to spark a lot of political conversations and debates amongst each other, especially with different viewpoints. And I feel like in today's society, we lack a lot of that. And I think that's what comes down to that short attention span. We've developed this fear around talking about these political conversations. And that's something that was not around during the print era.
All right. Well, I think that was a pretty good discussion, don't you guys?
Yes.
All right, well, that is unfortunately all the time that we have at the desk tonight. The methods by which presidents have communicated to citizens have certainly greatly changed throughout social history, and social media has made communication extremely easy in this day and age. But as we have discussed here today, there are certainly pros and cons to each method. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Max. That's sadly all the time we have for today. In the meantime, stay updated with ATD on all of our socials at PSU at the desk and let us know what you want to see us cover next. I'm Lauren Perry, and we will see you back at the desk next week.